And a question that I really wanted to ask you was, why do you think this particular case captured such international attention, both at the time and then why is it still doing it now? Was it right place, right time? Did it have the right look?
Look, the real reason, the initial reason that there was huge press coverage was because the McCanns, quite wisely, they thought, wanted it. In the end, it became the bane of their existence. But that night, when they were sitting in their agony after the police had come and the police had gone for the time being at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, they sat with their friends in apartment 5A with their little girl missing, and they thought, what can we do? That are the police doing enough? No, maybe they took a long time to come. Maybe they're not, and maybe so we should do something. They tried to reach out to TV stations through relatives in the UK on the telephone, and by 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, the news was very brief, but the news was being broadcast on Sky News and other stations in the UK, whereas at the time it wasn't on Portuguese news, I gather, at all. And during the case, there's a Portuguese law which says that information cannot be given out, should not be given out by law while it's ongoing. Now, that's very different from the reality, which later on involved, people saying things on the QT, saying on the quiet, saying to journalists, we can't, we're not telling you this really, but happens everywhere. It's an old-fashioned police tactic, but it got let loose. But anyway, from the McCann's own effort, the press first knew about it. But what the McCanns, by their own admission, also thought was, wait a minute, this is the age of the internet. Jerry McCann, the father, had a sister, I believe, called Philomena in the north of Scotland, who was hip to computers and who had students, and she brought her students or former students into a garage, a sort of makeshift shed, where they sat. And within, 36 hours, people in New Zealand knew about this case, people who would never otherwise have known about it, which had the effect of getting Madeleine's picture, the picture of the little girl, out there to millions, whereas in a similar case in the past, it would not have gone out to millions, or certainly not for a very long time. And in the end, though, starting an avalanche of chatter on the internet, chatter which was often far from responsible.
I think you are totally right that it became a monster of its own and started to roll along on its own momentum. It's a difficult situation, to the listeners at home. I wonder what they think they would have done in that situation. Would you have allowed the police to have conducted the investigation quietly? Would you have thought that was the best route, or would you have tried to react by getting as much information, as much exposure as possible to have the photo of this little girl out there? I would guess that the vast majority of people would just want maximum exposure, as much. It feels like you're doing something, right? Like you're helpless in this situation. What can I do? How can I impact and help? You're not an investigator. You don't understand forensics. You don't have these sort of things. So one of the things you can do is disseminate, right?
But that's not only your natural reaction, but it's also the best advice from the experts in the field. Some of your listeners might be too young to remember it, but years ago, when, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the U.S. first got going, for instance, they were behind a great campaign where missing children's faces were put on those cardboard milk cartons. Mm-hmm. And that was a way of getting maximum exposure, because everybody got a carton of milk. Yep. That was a way of getting maximum exposure for every missing child. And it's a brilliant tool. And the internet is a wonderful and enormous milk carton in that sense. But so it does, it can be incredibly effective. And what we do know is that publicity does help. There was a recent case, I believe, in Minnesota where a young girl was missing for a period of months, and she was spotted by a passerby because her face was recognized. You see these kind of things in the Elizabeth Smart case. Again, she was recognized. There was an oddity about the scene she was seen in by a passerby, and it was brought to police attention. So the idea that maximum exposure isn't the right thing is actually wrong. It is the right thing, but it can turn around and bite you back.
Yeah.
And it could have been precisely the right thing in the case of little Madeleine McCann. Not least because Madeleine McCann had a thing called a coloboma, which is scientific word, medical word for a blemish in her right pupil of her right eye, which if she was walking past you in a store or along the pavement, you wouldn't notice immediately, but it was a blemish. It was an obvious thing. So in those first days when she was missing, and even later, if people's attention had been drawn to this feature of her eyes, then perhaps she might have been recognized, and the police or the shop security or wherever could have been called. So it was like the picture on the milk carton. It was a relevant thing to do.
Yes, I understand.